To accept the meeting minutes from the October 25th. So moved by Dan and second by Supervisor Hanky. All in favor?
Give Bob the move.
All right, come on. Second by Supervisor Saul. All in favor, saying aye. Aye. There you go. You can hop off now, Bob. All right. Tourism update. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, so some odds and ends things. The first thing I want to go over is the Flannel Fall Crawl, which, as a reminder, was an event that we put on. This is the second year that we've done it. It ran from mid-October to mid-November, and we had 15 participating venues, which is basically the craft beverage operators throughout the county. And the idea was that you register, it's a challenge and a point system, you know, over the 30-day period, you visit as many of the outlets as you can, collect points, and then we actually had some gift cards for the breweries and distilleries as an award. So the other thing that this gets us, besides the actual participants, and we're trying some new technology to try and come up with metrics as to how successfully things are working. And there's this application called Sweep Widget that kind of allowed us to track who was participating, where they were going, what points they were doing. So we are still going through the analysis of this, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview. It looks like we had about 160 people that actually participated, which means went around to the breweries. But it also means there were about 760 people who were interested enough in it that they registered and followed it, even if they didn't actually visit any of the breweries. In addition to that, there was all of the social media advertising, following interest that happened because of that. And again, I just got through this and I'm still going through it, but based on this, it looks like about 300,000 people saw our advertising for this. And we also did a YouTube video ad, which I have on my phone and I can show you what it looks like. So again, we're still scrounging through the metrics as to what all of this means. Our hope was that we invested some money in it this year to start creating awareness of it as an annual event, and then it starts becoming easier and easier to pull people in to participate. So
Looking at that, from my understanding, with 946,000 impressions and 301,000 reached, that reached means they click through from the impression into the ad.
right.
So we have a click-through rate of 3.14, which is
And that's just
Very good.
that's just Facebook and Instagram. We've also got we did some advertising on YouTube and some other places. So it generated a lot of interest
that's really, and even there, 39,000 to
on
40.
YouTube, right?
That's a higher click. That's a little
It's a
lower.
higher,
It's a little lower. It's
right. So, you know, all in all, I think it was a success. And, you know, I think we're ultimately going to have to measure, you know, what we spent, what we got out of it, what we would need to spend next year, and what it's getting, you know, what we're getting for it in the long term. But this is the first actual event that we have put on, as opposed to like the Cheese Tour or Open Studios Tour that another entity did. So more to come. We'll see how it goes and whether we decide to continue on.
Before you go on, again, the takeaway from that is just knowing what our advertising capability is, like what we hold, 3.5 on a click-through. What fall flannel,
I know, I do that
the
every time.
flannel fall. crawl.
FFC.
Yeah. It's putting the fall and the flannel in the opposite direction. Just knowing that, you know, they'd be interested when we do some other events to know that 3.5 is pretty much where the click-through rate was on this. If our CTR goes down or up on another event, but that's a good benchmark to know what our advertising capacity is.
It also got picked up by Times Union and was put on their event calendar. It was on the News 10 event calendar. So it clearly got noticed. You know, again, this is one event. We want to try and experiment and keep figuring out what's working and, you know, what we might need to change direction in.
What do you have a rough idea what it cost us?
I can tell you on the advertising. So again, we're still picking it out. I thought there was a video that was, I don't know, like 1,300, something like that. This is about 3,000 that we spent on Facebook. 2,000. I think it was about 2,000 on Instagram. So that was the social media advertising. And again, we're still putting all of the numbers together. And obviously what we want to do is, the metrics that we have is what we've collected in terms of who actually participated, how much it got out there. What we can't really collect is, so here was a comment that came on Facebook. We had a lot of fun planning bike rides around a couple of the breweries, and we just loved Victory View for their wine. So part of what you're trying to do is you're saying, ride a bike or drive a car, come collect your points at this brewery or whatever. And while you're there, stop at Joe's store and pick up a sandwich or a gift, whatever. The idea is to attract them to visit other things while they are participating in the breweries. Those are going to be we're never going to be able to quantify those exactly, but we can, through the social media metrics, at least get a sense of how many people we're reaching. So
one of the things we talked about last week, Dan, at the meet and greet for short-term rental operators was, having this information available to those people when they come into those short-term rentals, like, hey, when you're communicating with the guests, hey, is there anything going on this weekend? Yeah, we have a fall whatever.
Pub crawl, let's say pub crawl.
We have a pub crawl that's going on throughout all of our breweries and wineries throughout Washington County. So and that was part of the event, was to be able to promote things like this, so we can, it's cross promotion.
So that actually brings me to the second event, which is the short-term rental event. So this was intended to be the first of either a regularly ongoing roundtable or more periodic with some sort of an online communication platform. But the idea was that we wanted to make it easy for the short-term rental operators to explain what nearby offerings are, like how they can experience Washington County, where they can go, what some itineraries and trips are. So we put together this binders and gave them out to the short-term rental operators. And in the binders, there's room to put all the trail cards, the visitors guides, and then the idea is allow the owners of the short-term rental properties to create their own experiences. So they can put flyers in the notebook that says, hey, have you ever been to the Pember Museum or some other place? And then we created this, an experience guide that says, if you're going to do all of this, you can actually host these experiences on Airbnb. And I also want to comment that Airbnb was actually very enthusiastic about partnering with us. We made it clear that because Airbnb is paying us occupancy tax and they are the only ones that are, that the way that our short-term rental operators and tourism culture is getting it back is through marketing our tourism efforts. So we produced this, which says, hey, this is how you can create your experience, how you can post it onto the Airbnb website, and then also how you can start working on filling up your own notebook about what there might be. You think about when you check into a hotel, there are frequently, visitors guides. This is a way for us to help them to prepare something. And then this is just a copy of the presentation that Mr. Griffith so superbly delivered.
Jesse did a great job too.
And Jesse did a great job as well, which was essentially talking about, just tips. And there was a lot of sharing of experiences in terms of what worked well, how to get, things increased, how to reach out to, again, those experiences that are nearby you so that we can start cross-promoting. So it was enthusiastically enough received that we said we were thinking about doing it again in April, and we got asked to do it sooner and more frequently.
Yeah, which I'm going to continue to push back on that, because we are not a tourism industry. We are the county. We're trying to assist them. If they want to create a business group of short-term rental operators that want to get together more frequently, they can. But from the county level, we want to recap how the summer went, and we want to roll out what our promotions are in April and get them the material so they have and at that time too. and kind of gets them talking about the events that we have coming up in the summertime. Our goal is not to be in the driver's seat of, of like the short-term rental, opportunities here. We have about 35 attendees.
Yeah, there were probably about 35, and then, with the participants, there were probably 40 people in the room, I would say. So what we did was we had everybody sign in as they came in. So we collected email and contact information, and we intend to reach out to all of the participants, gain their permission to being added into, whether it's going to be like a separate Facebook group or whether it's just going to be an online discussion. I don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we are asking people, do you want to be part of this group? I actually had a couple of other people call me who couldn't make it that night, but asked to be informed about anything that was delivered there. So again, as Mr. Griffith said, the idea is we want to help them to help themselves. We don't want to do it all for them, but by creating this collaborative group, giving them a head start on this is what you should be thinking about, and then maybe meeting periodically, I think it was fairly well received.
We had a great mix of, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, sleep 4, sleep 8. So a great mix of all types of short-term rentals there too. So it was good. Some campsites, some that had larger homes.
Okay. All right, so that was basically what I had on tourism. Any questions?
Good job.
Before I get into broadband, something that I want to report to the committee, as you know, Homefront, which is the operator of several senior housing facilities, had been having issues. We partnered with them to put in a CDBG application because they have basically been having operational difficulties. This was to assess, are they a viable organization going forward? Is there a way to help them? Should they simply be absorbed by one of the Saratoga agencies? So the CDBG announcements actually did come out, and we were not funded for that, which was a serious surprise to me. I went through all of the CDBG announcements. There was, which is basically all of their housing, their micro enterprise, their public facilities, their infrastructure money. There was one award to Washington County, and that was for Fort Edward, and that was for a planning grant. So the way that the CFAs work this year, that there were some programs that were taken out of the regional council portion of the review, and they were only reviewed by state agencies. What's interesting about this is that some of these CDBG were actually part of the CFA. So I'm a little fuzzy on why they were announced before the rest of the CFAs, but in any event, they were. I have requested a formal debrief and scoring analysis to try and understand why this didn't get funded, because I know that it was very enthusiastically received both by Office of Community Renewal and Regional Council. So trying to understand why. But beyond that, the next question is going to be, what do we do? I had reached out and gotten a couple of proposals from a couple of consultants that might be able to assist Homefront going forward. And we had an estimate of, depending on what all gets done, basically between maybe 30 and 45,000. So the ask to OCR was a $45,000 ask, and then Homefront was going to contribute 2,500 in match. So the question for the committee is, I have not been able to connect with Brian Gilchrist yet, who's the board chair for Homefront. But do I continue trying to pursue other sorts of funding? I don't know where Homefront stands right now in terms of its viability. What I do know is we're not going to get this funding. So how hard do I work, I guess, to try and figure out how to help them going forward? Whether there's more funding sources, whether Homefront just decides that they want to dissolve and we then no longer have any housing agencies in the county. Any comments?
Laura, is this the one that we discussed that the decisions were being made at the governor's office? Is that before? So
the governor's office technically does not have anything to do with the scoring of these. The way that CFAs are scored is 20% of the score comes from the regional council and 80% of the score comes from the state agency. And then, yes, I believe they are sent to the governor's office for final review, just in case there's comments, et cetera, et cetera. So the scoring officially comes from regional council and state agency. So, yeah. So, again, all I can do is ask for a scoring review from the funding agency and go from there. But again, then it's going to be a question for the county is, does the county want to try and continue to help Homefront, or say, this was the best solution we could come up with, it wasn't funded, maybe Homefront should just dissolve? I don't know.
I guess I need to be refreshed. I remember her presentation, and I asked a bunch of questions there. Isn't that, it's a private non-for-profit? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Homefront.
Mhm.
And how urgent is it that we take any action whatsoever? I mean, is there an urgency to let them know anything of what we are thinking of doing?
So-
Do we have to make decisions soon?
So there were two issues with Homefront. Homefront owns several senior housing facilities, including Fort Edward, Kingsbury, Argyle, and Fort Anne. So because there are no longer any employees of Homefront, the management of those assets was turned over to, I believe it was the Saratoga Veterans Coalition. Unfortunately, when the assets got turned over, revenue responsibility got turned over as well, and it became a problem in that there was no longer any revenue in Homefront in Washington County to go forward. So basically they were unsustainable because there was no money left. So the first question is, what happens to those assets that are owned by Homefront? Do they simply get turned over to another agency, such as the Saratoga Veterans Coalition? The second thing is, Homefront was the only entity that we had in the county that was sponsoring, if you were a veteran, low income, senior, or disabled and needed ADA compliance repairs or housing repairs to make your home safe, they were managing those programs for all of Washington County. So without Homefront, we don't have anybody else doing it. So that was the county's reason for being having interest in that. Does it matter if a Washington County entity owns the actual assets? Maybe, maybe not. But what we don't have is anybody to manage any kind of housing program.
When you say, go ahead, Dave, sorry.
I'm just thinking, have we talked to BSS about this or opposite agent to see if they have any resources to help, because it seems to be targeted towards seniors and people in need.
So our director of Office of the Aging is on the board of Homefront, as is our director of real property. I have not had any, we literally just got this. So again, I have not done any follow-up because, again, part of the question is that what you want me to do?
So we have a question of sitting tight and see what develops there, how that unwinds, or be proactive and try to find something else to replace that.
Correct.
I would say the former.
The first. Sit tight.
So sitting and see how that unwinds first, especially if you've got two department heads who are on that board to let us know where to go forward. This one's getting out ahead of ourselves now.
When you say the Saratoga Veterans Coalition, is it PCHC or is it is there a Saratoga Veterans Coalition?
No, it's the one I believe it's the one that owns the house down.
Foreverly House,
Yes.
the VCHC, Veterans Community Housing.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah, okay.
Because there's two of them with very similar names. Yeah.
Michelle Street.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now they are interested in taking it over? Is the veterans?
So my understanding is some of the buildings need some level of work, and how much work was part of what the question, right, was part of what the question was. It is my belief that whether Saratoga wanted to take the actual buildings over, if you're going to take a building over, you want it to be in as good a shape as possible so you don't have to spend money on it. I believe that they were hoping that through Homefront or some other agency, somebody would invest some money into those buildings so that they could then take them over in good condition. But again, that has
But
to be followed up.
they would own the real estate, correct?
That's one possible solution. Right
Well,
now,
no, if
they
they
don't.
took the organization over, the organization owns the real estate now. Does Homefront own these buildings?
Yes,
So if they merged or whatever, Homefront did with another organization and
then whoever took over would own.
would
it.
end up with the assets.
I understand where Matt's going in. So it sounds like, Homefront has to figure out, because again, you're right there, whoever, if Homefront has to give up receivership of the properties, then
Right.
ultimately, we're talking about who owns the property. Does Homefront own the property or does the bank own the properties?
I don't.
Is there a
know.
lender that?
I don't know if there is any.
Yeah, I think these are good questions and Matt's.
But we don't have enough
right.
information to make a decision at this point.
Yeah, we gotta go slow into this one.
Okay, all right. So as soon as I can communicate with Homefront's board chair, who's Brian, I will do that. Because again, this literally is just hot off the presses. So,
Do you think it would be helpful to have Brian here? Again, he was here at that one meeting quite some time ago. And maybe he can answer. It's been difficult to get answers to some of the questions that we've asked in the past, I guess.
Maybe he's
Not
gonna
knowing
need,
what direction they're going.
maybe he's gonna need a little bit more time. Brian usually comes in January or February, right, for CCE?
Well, COVID sort of changed everybody's
Oh,
schedule. He
okay.
used to be here fairly regularly, but
Right.
I think we can certainly ask him.
I just I want to be prepared when he comes. I don't want us to fire questions at him and him not have the answers.
Right. Well, the first, as of
Yeah,
right
back
now,
to you.
because I haven't connected with him, he's not aware that the funding wasn't awarded.
Matt, did you have a question?
No, just let it play out.
Okay.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to broadband.
Oh, you have longer arms, yeah.
Okay. So what I've given you here is just copies of a couple of slides from a recent presentation to the state broadband office, who has a new executive director. So the presentation was talking about, what is happening with the federal money that's coming into the state, with the state budgeted money, and what the new broadband, which is also called Connect All Office, is going to look like. So that top little diagram there essentially talks about or shows what all the Connect All programs are. So the first thing to be aware of is we in Washington County are primarily interested in rural broadband, right? What we need is more broadband deployment. But this money is going to be used for a number of things, including innovation and connectivity, municipal infrastructure. So in some cases, there is some push for municipally owned broadband networks, connecting affordable housing. So again, the point is there was, we'll go over the budget in a minute, but there is federal funding that is coming down to the state through the Jobs and Infrastructure Act, as well as state budgeted money that's going to go to all of this broadband stuff, of which rural connectivity is only one activity. So the total funding that New York State is expecting to have, including the funding from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, ARPA funding that the state is putting to it, and what was put into the state budget, is a bit over $1 billion. So to put that in perspective, when Governor Cuomo's Broadband for All program was put out, that program too was about $1 billion. And that program was about nothing but deploying broadband. It did not include all of these other activities. So one of the first things that I look at is, depending on how unserved or underserved New York State is considered to be, the first question is there actually going to be enough money out of this to ensure that we actually get to that 99% served by fiber as opposed to satellite? So the way that the Infrastructure and Jobs Act funding works, as you can see here, it says estimated between 400 and 800 million. Right now, the state BPO, which is Broadband Office, is doing their version of mapping, and the FCC is doing their version of mapping, and so far they don't match because I have all that data. So because the allocation to New York State is going to be based on what the FCC thinks is unserved in New York State. To my mind, the most important thing is to get the FCC maps accurate, because that right there is what New York State is going to be based on. So although we have the data and we're going to do a bulk challenge, I'm working on with our GIS to try and identify how accurate the FCC mapping is. But the public can also weigh in. If you go to, it's called broadbandmap.fcc.gov, you can enter your own address into it, and kind of similar to what the original state maps did, it will tell you who is, and this was just released about a week ago, it will tell you who the FCC thinks is serving your address. So the very first thing the FCC did is they created what's called the broadband fabric. And the fabric was nothing more than the identification of actual addresses that were eligible to receive broadband. So it's not vacant lots, it's not a hunting cabin up in the Adirondacks, it's residences and businesses, and it's not just a barn on a lot, it's residences and businesses that should be eligible to receive broadband. So once that fabric was released, the next step is the providers then come in and start claiming addresses. And the rules are, in order for a broadband provider to say that they're serving that address, they have to be able to connect to that address within a 10-day period with no additional charges. So what is going to happen is this initial iteration of the map has been released. We as a county have the ability to challenge it, i.e. to delete off any addresses, which we are working on right now. Then the challenges are going to come back from the providers who are going to say that one's mine, I can serve that one. The back and forth that's going to go on. So if you look on the back page of this, this is what the Broadband Office says the timing is going to be. So based on this back and forth on this mapping process, New York State is anticipating that they are going to know how much money they are going to get in June of this year. I would argue that it might get pushed out a little bit based on the way the mapping's been going so far, but somewhere around this year. Once New York State knows how much money they're going to have, they are then responsible for creating an action plan that has to go back to the FCC. And the FCC is then going to unlock a portion of that BEAD funding. The first portion of the funding that's going to be released is going to be for planning. So basically it says, are you looking at installing municipal infrastructures? Do you need more help figuring out who your unserved are, et cetera? There is no room in this time frame for those of us who are perhaps a little bit further on and already have a good idea of who our unserved are. The final proposal back to the FCC and the final allocation of funding isn't going to happen until late 2024. By that time, it gets released to the providers who then have to go through applications, permitting, hiring, and installation. So bottom line, through the state programs, I do not see that implementation and actual connection of fiber is going to happen before 2025, and I think it's likely to be later than that.
Implementation, planning has to be moved, planning, they'll award the funding by the end of 2024. And our ARPA funds have to be earmarked and spent by the end of 2024, implemented by the end of 2025, right?
26.
26.
Okay. But what we're spending has to be allocated before the end of 24. Right. Yeah. All right, so
So this is what I am suggesting I would like to propose as our next steps. Again, uncertainty as to how much money, how far it's going to go, when it's going to be available. You're then going to be competing with all of the providers who are trying to get supplies, linemen, and everybody else all at the same time. So we have talked,
yeah,
about using the ARPA funding, which at this point stands at, I believe, about 3.3 million. You're also aware we have a request into Congresswoman Stefanik for another $1 million. Based on timing on the federal budget, I'm hoping we will have an answer on that sometime in January. If that happens, then we would presumably have a little bit over 4 million to put towards broadband. So based on the fact that our initial analysis says that we have somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 unserved households, again, we're still working on refining that with the addition of the new FCC data
In the county?
within the county.
Okay.
1,500, 1,800. Again, kind of depending on what we consider residents. I mean, maybe even it's as high as 2,000, maybe it's as low as 1,000, but say 1,500 ballpark-ish. The average cost per passing when broadband for all was deployed based on costs at the time was probably around $3,000 to $4,000 per household in Washington County on average. I am estimating, and so what has ended up happening is we have what I call the Swiss cheese effect. Because of the way that the deployments happened based on census blocks, there are places all over where you have fiber running in an area and a cluster of 10 homes that isn't very far away that's easily connectable. It was just a little too much of a reach for the providers to spend more money on. There are then going to be those households that are going to be at the top of a mountain, and no matter what we do, they're going to be impossible to get to. But call it a guesstimate, whatever, if we are trying to get to that actual 99% of the county is served, if I use an average of $5,000 to $7,000 a household, then I'm saying that it's probably going to cost between 10 to 15 million to actually get to that 99% served. So my proposal is if we've got, say, 4 million, what I would like to be able to do is work with all of their providers, all of the existing providers in the county, where their networks are, where it's reasonable for them to expand to, and get proposals back from them to cover. We'll have to work on numbers, but perhaps as much as 50% of the cost. We're not going to pay for 100% of it. But if we can find a way to incent them to extend the networks, again, I don't think that we're going to get 100% of it done with 4 million, but I think we can get a lot of additional connections with 4 million.
Can I make an assumption? So you talk about those clusters of 10 homes.
Mhm.
And John Smith is one of those homes that says, hey, I want to be connected. And you find out it's going to be $5,000 to $7,000. But you really can't use that $5,000 to $7,000 cost on all 10 homes. It's the first guy that's $5,000 to $7,000. Shouldn't it be the economies of scale? So if you're going to hook up all 10 homes, that cost should come down per household.
Well, that's why it's an average.
So instead of 10 to 15 million, if there were all little clusters, then I'm going to come way down.
Well, I'm using an average. So New York State has, there is going to be a threshold that they're going to define as high cost households.
Mhm.
Right now, it's looking like, and again, this could change, but it's looking like $15,000 per household is the number that they don't want to exceed. So in some cases, you're going to have one household that might cost $12,000 and one household might cost $3,000.
Gotcha.
What I'm saying is 5 to 7 is an average, and I'm really hoping it's lower than that.
And you're guessing, and it won't really know until we get those proposals back.
Correct.
So you're asking us to consider moving ahead in that direction.
What I'm asking you to do is consider moving ahead with working with the providers. I want to create a list of all of the unserved addresses. And I want the providers to come back with, take a chunk of these and give me a proposal and tell me how much it's going to cost to serve these. And what I don't want to do, so the way the state has done it so far is what I would call almost a race to the bottom. By creating a bidding system that says, go for the cheapest. If you've got a cluster of homes here and a high-cost home here, and a cluster of homes here, and these guys go for this and this, well, guess what? Now it costs twice as much to get to that high-cost home as it would have if you've done it in the first place. What I want to do is eliminate that as much as possible so that we are considering geography when proposals are come in that says, okay, so there may be a couple of higher cost homes, but it's going to be cheaper to get them now than it is to leave them off the list and do absolutely nothing but the bottom cheapest of all of the addresses. So I think that there's going to be some back and forth in terms of what makes sense. Some of those high cost homes, we're just not going to be able to get to.
Where's the info on the finding out where those are? We're doing that in-house here. You have that information. You're gonna generate that information. Here's where they are. We're not relying on it by anybody else.
No,
Okay.
so
So
what
that's good information.
I am using the FCC database,
Right.
the ECC data that we paid for, what New York State, we have overlaid all of
Right.
it.
So you're gonna have that. You're gonna send that out to the providers.
Correct.
In-house.
They're going to come
And they're gonna
back.
come back with proposals that we can look at and accept or decline or whatever.
Correct.
And is it your intention that considering what they serve around those clusters, there would be competition to get to that 10-home thing, or Spectrum's all the way around it and there's no anybody else even close? It'll probably be Spectrum going after, so there'll be less competition for that.
So in certain cases, if you've got Spectrum at one side of a town and Verizon and others, it's going to make sense for them to extend what's closest. In other cases, you're going to have situations where more than one provider is equidistant from what needs to be served.
Okay.
In that case, probably what we would look at is cost as the deciding factor.
Gotcha. And then when you bring those back, those proposals back, you have to prioritize those to see funding group A, funding group B, funding group C.
That, again, this is part of, I'm just starting to develop this. And what I want to do is, it's going to be a set of rules. It's going to be things like speed, like are they going to be allowed to charge if you've got a 2,000-foot driveway? All of the things that we, and I've got a bunch of proposal templates comparing with what New York State did. So one way to do that might be to, I don't know, almost do a subcommittee that says, I will put that together and then have somebody review it, tell me whether you all agree with it, then we put it out there, and then we have a method by which we're making the final selection over what we fund.
So when we look at it, I mean, I've got 2.2 miles, which is either provider could extend it to because they all are there. But I think that when we look at some of these higher cost homes, I mean, when I see some of the quotes given to people, it's like $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to extend some of these lines up. Do we want to carry that burden? Or do we want to think about alternative sources to help them get broadband, maybe through wireless connections? Its ability to forecast that a different way, and maybe it costs a lot less than actually stringing the wire up, which is extremely expensive, especially going up some of these landscapes.
But to make that choice, you need all that proposal data back from her to get there to make that choice. Don't you?
And also, the geography has changed, there's constant change because now that the per pole has changed and that tax has changed, it's going to be less than some of the broadband office when they did the broadband office per mile.
So there's two things that have changed. The fiber tax per mile is gone, and there is also regulation about what pole owners can charge the fiber owners. What has not yet been eliminated is the survey fee from DOT. So that right there, I mean, if it costs, and I can't remember, I think it was like an average of about $7,000 for some of these surveys for X number of poles. That is not a cost that's been eliminated. So again, it may, maybe some poles have already been part of a survey. Again, we won't know that until we get cost back from the providers and proposals.
Jay?
I know you don't want it. What if we don't get the funding to reach every home on a total cost basis? I mean, we're still gonna, we need to look at a cost per mile and make sure that we're covering the most people with what money they do send us. And, you
So
know,
first,
and Jackson's a prime example. We have several mile units with 10 to 15 homes that never got touched. And then we've got the other ones at the top of the mountain that they're gonna throw on the claiming gear to get up through to them, you know?
so firstly, again, remember, if I, just based on current numbers, based on past costs, if I'm just saying average of 5 to 7 a home, based on how many we have, we need 10 to 15 million. Even if we subsidize the providers for half and we've got 4 million, that's still not going to get us completely covered. So one way or another, without more money, which we would then have to rely on when the rest of the state funding comes out from this, then they can get the last ones. I don't think that for $8 million, we can get to 99% served. We can get a lot closer than we are right now, but we're not going to get it. We're not going to get it. There's always going to be some that we're never going to get to. And then there's probably going to be a number that are marginal. We just don't have the money to get to them. They might have to wait for the state for another few years.
Laura, I really think you're on something. I like this idea of asking them for that. And when in our town of Easton, we've been following that and involved in it too. We work diligently identifying unserved. And then we went to the two major providers. One was Spectrum, and I think Charter. Somehow the way they keep the two names separate, but it's the same company. And the other one is what's the new one down there? Slick. Well, they both gave a price of, well, Spectrum gave a price total of what they would finish off our town for, except for the identified areas they would not touch because they're not there.
Right.
And Slick was there or whatever. And then they said they identified the cost for each home on each road for us. They said, and we're willing to put skin in the game. So in other words, we weren't going to pay for it all because if they waited for all the state funding to come through, like on this program, Slick might get it and they'd lose the customers. And if we did it now and they put skin in the game, what happened was they got the customers next year, you know, and they could start billing them. So I think what you're doing is the right thing to do and say, you know, we've identified what basically, and what they said is they wanted to take that and verify it with their records to make sure they had, because they have all the records on what is unserved too. So
They all
can come
have
up
their
with-
own version of it.
Yeah, everybody got, and so they'll verify it and they'll actually, they help correct some of ours and we corrected some of theirs. So this is a good start and you might be surprised it'd be way under that. We had Anazeski Lane, there's one house at the end of Anazeski Lane, right off Route 40. It's a half a mile long out to that house. And they quoted a price of $7,000 to run out there to one house. So that's not bad for a half a mile.
So one of the things that I thought about was we could put out an RFP, but I honestly don't think that that makes sense because I don't think it helps us to bring a new provider in. Like, do we want some other internet company to come in and start building because it'll be too expensive? I think we actually have 3 providers who have fiber to the home. One of them is Charter Spectrum, one of them is Slick, and one of them is Verizon. They are the only 3 fiber-based solutions that currently have networks in the county. And I just believe it makes more financial sense for them to extend their existing networks to pick up as many new people as they can than trying to come up with another company who might come in. You may have read Saratoga Springs, the city of Saratoga Springs, just but again, they're a very densely populated city. There is an internet company that is going to come in at no charge and it's going to string fiber to every single residence in Saratoga, and it's not costing them anything. I don't believe we have the density to be able to secure an agreement like that.
Right, Dave?
So I've had discussions with this spectrum for years. There are two things they take into consideration. Is number one, what's the cost to spring water? That's the first cost. But they also said they have to look at what's the operational cost of maintenance over years. And sometimes when you don't have the density, they can't get the payback on their operational costs. So that's one thing we may run into in some of these skinnier areas.
There's also what's called the take rate. So let's say that you have 10 homes in a mile and a provider is stringing fiber to all 10 of those homes. If only 5 of those households actually sign up, what's generating revenue for that company is 5 households, not 10. So when they do their forecasting, they have to do it based on what the take rate is.
So you're getting direction from this committee that we think that's a good idea, you should pursue this and move forward with this program?
Yes.
I would support that on the meeting motion. I think it's a great idea, let's go
Yeah,
forward with it.
I'm all for it.
Yep, we're good.
And see how interested they are.
Yeah, the first thing is going to be, how much money do we have? So we'll all keep our fingers crossed that, are funded through Congresswoman Stefanik. And then right now I'm working on refining, along with our GIS office, what the final list is. I would imagine that in terms of timing, it's a good couple of months before I'm going to have anything, but I would like to get started on it.
It took us 3 months before they because they send their engineers out too, once they identify, they check roads for, it takes a long time. Can you in any way in that writing of that letter to them and kind of imply we're expecting them to foot some of the bill if we give them that road?
Oh, that
Yeah,
definitely will be the
that's-
case. We're not going to offer to fund 100% of anything.
Right. Oh, well, I know that that's what we're thinking, but we want to make sure we get them right on the right page too.
Right.
Sure,
So
we're all at the right color lenses.
right. So in terms of sort of creating some sort of document for them to respond to, obviously, Mr. Wicks to my left here will have some input into that. Would anybody else like to review, like, do you want a committee? Do you want to look at it? What do you want me to do? with it?
I'm confident with the attorney, in the verbiage, unless you guys want to review it in committee, Okay,
You could show it to us before you mail it out, but I don't think we want to get involved in the creation.
right.
Okay.
Understood, yeah. Okay. Dana, you had a question?
Yeah, Laura, in your attendance at these meetings, I mean, we look at 62 counties in the state of New York. Is it primarily the rural counties that are still having to connect? This isn't going on in major metropolitan areas, correct?
It is and it isn't. So in the major metropolitan areas, yes, there are some places where there are problems with not everybody in a building gets service. The bigger issue in the metropolitan areas, and this is a direct quote from the former broadband office director who's no longer there, but his comment was, I live in New York City and I only have a choice of one provider. Okay, well, that's tough, but we don't have a choice of any.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
I'm in here, that's.
That's why I was curious, because I'm curious, like, the state funding on this is 300 million. If they could just double that number, probably get it. It would be big to get everybody connected at 99%.
Well, okay, but remember, it's about more than just connectivity. So for example, digital equity, that has to do with cost, accessibility, et cetera. So I believe you're all aware, but the state already has what's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. That is a program that has to be participated in by providers. So if you are on SNAP, you're below poverty thresholds, and the provider, which Verizon, Slick, and Spectrum all do, you can sign up for the Affordable Connectivity Program and it will knock, I think, $30 off of your internet bill, something like that. That already exists. The digital equity programs are going to aim to expand that and make more affordable, low-cost options available. So again, this money is not, rural deployment is only one piece of what they're trying to do. And that's part of what my concern is there really going to be enough money to do all of this?
Because I look at this, I do find it interesting, they're funding the Buffalo Bill Stadium at 600 million, that's the state input. Yeah, they got 300 million activity and availability to broadband internet in the state of New York. And this would be probably a better investment.
Depends on where
An
the-
open air stadium.
Depends on where the money for the stadium came from. They took in $450 million from the casinos that haven't been paid for over 3 years. So I mean, the revenue came, I mean, I get what you're saying, but you gotta see where that revenue came from too. They finally got paid back on 3 years worth of back pay from the gambling facilities. In terms of about $460 million.
There's also another, I'm sort of starting to see more and more articles written about this push on the state's coronavirus funds. And that is, as we all know, through coronavirus, there were billions and billions of dollars of unemployment insurance claims. Unemployment insurance is footed by the employers, paid to the state, because the state didn't have enough money to pay it all. They borrowed federal money. There are, through a lot of business councils and other entities, a lot of push for New York State to use ARPA funds to repay the unemployment insurance rather than smacking small businesses, which is the way that it's working right now. And I believe, I don't remember what the number is, but about half of the states across America, that's exactly what they did. They used coronavirus funds so as not to penalize the small business owners for replenishment of unemployment insurance. But again, the point is, there's a lot of calls for that funding. This is what they presented. Whether this is going to change, depending on how much federal funding they get, I don't know, but this is what was put out.
So one thing on, when we look at what's not served, is the density levels, when you get in the other park areas, it costs more to string to fewer homes. So that's part of what we're looking at in terms of the cost.
From the digital equity program, if I have been arrested previously for a marijuana offense, will I get broadband sooner?
That has nothing to do with it.
No, if you're stealing broadband from somebody.
There you go. If you're stealing broadband, you get caught.
Okay, that's all I have.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, this was brought to my attention. I'm glad we got some hunters here to discuss this.
Yep.
There's a program in New York State, in the southern zone, that unless the county opts out, which we never did,
Right.
there's a new hunting season from December 26th to January 1st for muzzleload and bow. So when people come home to visit you, you can take them out to hunt. Great idea, right?
Yeah.
No problem, no downsides there.
What happens when we have early snow?
Problem is, snowmobilers cannot get on the trail until hunting season is over. So they would get on there December 16th or 17th now.
Right.
Now they have to wait till January 2nd.
Right.
So
If there's no.
there's no hunting between the 16th and the 26th, I don't think.
Right.
But they can't ride.
Right.
And then during that week of hunting, they can't ride. So they basically got over 2 weeks worth of snowmobile that they can't use from a tourism standpoint, and they're upset about it. Now, as it turns out, typical state of New York, if you don't opt out, you're in. Well, we would have had to have opted out earlier this year to do it for 2022. So the season's in Washington County for this year. Nothing we can do about it.
And last year was the first year that they did this, and they did not give an opt-out option
Right.
last year. Bob and I had looked at it, and we talked about it with Roger, and wanted to opt out, but then they said you couldn't opt out in the first year. We got off our radar this year. We didn't.
So snowmobilers are basically screwed until January 2nd.
Yeah.
Yeah,
next
there's
year.
snow anyway.
They're probably snowing like hell now, but they can't get out there.
Right.
But
That's an issue.
Roger found out that for 2023, we have to opt out by May 1st.
We're gonna put it on the agenda for January.
We have to, it's a local law, right?
Local law, you go.
Committee.
Every year.
Full board, public hearing, local law. If we don't get started now, May 1st, we won't be able to opt out if we want to opt out.
My conversation with the QDMA, the Quality Deer Management Association, the membership from that, they don't want us to take part in this additional hunting season. You get a situation, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but antlers come off. You can't, if you have an inexperienced hunter, we might be killing some of our doe off as opposed to bucks. So there's the QDMA says no to this. Many of our hunting associations say no to this, and it's part of the reason for this, and I may be causing a conspiracy here, but it's not. Bob, do more deer die on the roadways, or do they die in the woods from hunters shooting them?
days.
Yeah, so the insurance companies would love it if we had additional hunting seasons, so that more deer die in the woods and they don't have to, they don't have to, cover the cost of additional deer being hit on the roads.
The sole bit of the point was, you could start bow hunting October first.
Right.
And you have all of October, all of November, half of December. Do you really need that extra week? When it prevents them from 2.5 weeks worth of snow.
Bob, don't we
I'm
have,
a hunter. I think it's a terrible idea to do this. I think we should opt out, and I would make a motion that we start that process.
don't we have a motion on the floor? Is there anybody wants to second that? Second.
Are you a hunter, Matt?
I am.
Should you be disclosing that?
I am,
Are
absolutely.
you a big game hunter or bird hunter?
I have both. I have license for both. And I think it's
Only
a,
disclose everything.
yes, I think it's a mistake to do this.
I have a lifetime license.
The other question I wanted to ask Bob in regards to, if I came back, sorry, all good. But a motion to start this in January. Get it going now for 2023.
Do we have discussion on
We're in discussion right now.
No, a second.
it? Raise my hand for discussion.
Go ahead, Dan.
So what is the motion? I have no problem having a motion to start the discussion. I need to know.
We opt out of the additional hunting season from December 26th to January 1st,
Right,
2023 in Washington County. Washington County opted out this year already.
but Dane is absolutely right. There's no snow anymore
But
until after January.
But if there is, but I mean, here's the other piece
You can't
too.
predict that.
If you want some, whether members from the QDMA, the Quality Deer Management Association, or any of the other, southern tier representation to come in and we can ask them to speak at, and
We can ask Dave Burgess, we can ask the snowmobile clubs of Washington County to come in.
Right.
If we want to have a big discussion, we can.
right.
Well, I think we need to. And the thing of it is, I'm not at all excited
That's what public
about
hearings are for.
deer management as far as growing all these big racks. I know a lot of hunters, they hunt to feed their family.
Yeah.
And
But the other thing is too,
We have 2.5 months.
We
This is
have-
1 week.
we have some of the longest hunting season in the contiguous states. Yeah, so I mean,
Some are doing close to others.
yeah, but you take New Jersey, which you wouldn't think they'd have much of a hunting season, they can shoot 7 to 10 deer down there. Now, you can't shoot 7 to 10 deer in New York State, even though it's longer.
a lot of road down there though.
I'm just saying there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. I'm not totally opposed to it, but I would like to get a lot more discussion. I learned a lot about voting machines this morning. If it wasn't for that dialogue, I wouldn't.
I learned a lot about this last year when we were anticipate opting out and, so I was,
That turned out we could.
right, exactly. Dana, go ahead.
So currently, we are opted in to allow people to hunt from.
For this
That-
year,
Because we did not do anything proactively, it's in
What your motion is to opt out of that.
2023.
So snowmobilers can get on the trails and snowmobile.
not this year.
Not
2024.
January, 2024, actually. Yeah.
Well, and-
Well, at the end of 2023.
Yeah.
23, no, December to January 23.
We have to do that each year. It's not like an opt-out and then we're opted out. Each year you have to opt out.
I don't understand that, Bob, maybe you do this. Bow hunting, you're not on snowmobile trail bow hunting. I mean, I can see rifle because that travels
Well,
when
I
you're
tried-
watching field, but
I tried to look some of that up and I couldn't really, it's not in the conservation law, I don't think. I think it's a Parks and Rec law that says that snowmobiles can't operate their trails during the big game season. I believe it's Parks and Rec law, but I couldn't find it, maybe.
Yeah, I couldn't find that either. I'm looking at so this is the original commentary from 2021 when they were talking about doing it. And it says, DC adopted the holiday deer hunt is what it's called. Earlier this year, providing hunters with new opportunities, and their families together. Today's proposed regulation, which is the opt-out, addresses concern expressed by some local leaders about a holiday hunt interfering with snowmobiling opportunities in their communities. Snowmobiling and small game hunting have safely coexisted for decades, and they're encouraging interested stakeholders to share comments. That was when it was going in. So it doesn't say anything about it's going to prohibit snowmobiling. What the concern was is that some landowners that open their land for hunting wouldn't want both of those things going on, so that there was no conflicts on the land.
There was a promotion last year by New York State to hold the keys. That was the snowmobile, promotion that was going on, but that was because nobody could opt out. So they, and I don't know if that was mandated by the snowmobilers to hold their keys.
I don't think it was, because it says the proposed regulation was designed to address concerns raised by some communities and stakeholders. Landowners might choose to prevent snowmobile access to trail networks that cross private land during the deer hunt, holiday deer hunt, limiting opportunities for snowmobilers during the last week of December. Then they go on to editorial and say, historically, snow cover deep enough to support snowmobiling is present only occasionally and in certain locations in the southern zone during the holiday.
Let them all on, all hell break loose.
It's not the snow, it was you guys who wanted.
Well, I
And I should have asked if you're a snowmobiler, not a hunter.
I am not a snowmobiler. I do not own a snowmobile.
but like Matt said, I think get Dave Perkins here and have him put his 2 cents in.
Well, you'll have a public.
It's a local law, so you have a public
Okay,
hearing.
right, it's something-
Everybody can come. Anybody who's opposed or not opposed,
Right.
they can come then.
Just that if you start in January, you'll be.
Or they can zoom in.
This
They
February.
go to the right place.
I sent
One
a-
of the issues we got.
I sent a message
So
to
we have-
the lieutenant for this area. He says, he just made me a blank statement, snowmobile trails are closed during the open big game season. And I said, that in town law or Parks and Rec? He said, Parks, I believe, I'll look it up, and he never got back. Well, he's probably busy.
We have a motion on the floor to put to add this to the
Start the process.
start the process in the January.
In the December board meeting, you have to set a public hearing for the January.
I could see putting a motion to have a hearing on to it. But you sound like it's a done deal.
No, you have to write a local law. In order to do that, you have to have a public hearing. So this takes months to go through.
Right, but 90-day.
I want to get
process.
the ball rolling so we can get to that point.
And you have to,
It'll be May in North Dakota.
right, and you have to opt out before May, by the end of May.
It'll be May in 5 months.
January scheduled.
Oh, by tomorrow.
For
Give that
February.
insight.
It started in December, that's only 4 months.
So do we have to do anything in this committee, or is it gonna have to?
Well, it would, I guess the instruction would be to draft a local law for consideration by the board.
Okay, so that's-
Opt out for 2023,
That's the motion.
and then that law would be introduced out of this committee and the public hearing resolution.
You'd have
Set of public
discussion
hearing
on
would be done.
the local law the next meeting.
Right.
Yeah, We'll be in the January.
The local law is probably not gonna be much more difficult than Washington County hereby opts out.
Probably more than I do.
Okay. we'll see
Different
the
story.
10th.
Well, I don't know, I think we're moving fast. I'd like to just preserve.
Holiday deer hunt.
The first I heard, they're putting a snowmobiles are pretty beat up that they can't.
So
All
all
until January.
in favor?
You wanna try to do that in the January regular meeting, introduce that?
Yes.
Whatever the process gets
Well,
going.
I thought we were starting in January. But now all of a sudden we'll wrap it up in January.
What can we do
No,
in December?
No, that's not what he said. He said introduce.
Yeah, introduce the local law so that we can set the public hearing.
For January?
Why can't we set it in December?
No reason you can't, that's what I'm asking.
At the December board meeting, we would have to set a public hearing for the January meeting
Yes.
to discuss this local
You
law.
introduce, well, let's.
And then after the public hearing, we can vote on it or not vote on it. We can vote on it in February or
Yeah.
March.
When
So you
you,
want the local law done this January? Or exempting us in 2020, or
Yes,
introduced in December,
Yes.
exempt us in 2023. And a resolution to set a public hearing at the December meeting, set the public hearing for the January regular meeting.
don't you need to discuss the local law again in this committee before you send it to?
We can discuss.
Well, I would, if it was something very complicated, I guess I would say, yeah, but it's gonna basically say we opt out.
So we'll have it at this meeting in December.
We're gonna have a December meeting.
I don't know.
well, I would suggest Roger call Warren County, get a copy of their law. if They did it for this year. I know, you can look at it.
Funny thing, Warren County
It's
is,
half southern zone, half northern.
What's that?
It would be after.
So does this only apply to one
Right,
zone?
we're gonna have.
All southern
we're
zone.
gonna have-
That's it.
Only southern zone, northern zone, it's not an issue. There's no.
so you're not in Southern Zone. Really, maybe it should only be.
Yeah, but
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sure snowmobiles.
So,
Dresden-
All right,
Most of what
Here.
just trying to figure out, so you want to see the law in committee before it goes to the board? That's the
the law is
question.
just gonna say we opt out, right? That's pretty much the extent of the
Well,
law.
Dan, why don't you discuss
Put it
this?
there for December.
Are we gonna have a December ag planning meeting?
Sounds like that's gonna get it done.
I didn't think we
This
were,
is the
but
December.
Okay,
Right, this is the meeting for December. The question is, if we miss this one, nothing happens to the December.
Unless I'm bringing it up now because we gotta be May like that. I don't care more
You
than
have a
January,
special-
February. I
We
don't
have a
care.
special.
There's
before
something not so
December.
long ago about these committee meetings and notices that when you introduce something that's not on the agenda, you don't take action on to it till the next meeting. We hammered on
I would
that.
love to do it because you know what, Paul and Brian are here. If you want to bring it to the January ag planning.
Okay, so you want to table this until the January Ag Planning and Tourism meeting.
And make a motion then, so we do it in January and February.
Okay,
Is that okay with you, Rob?
we're motion to table this conversation to the Ag Planning and Tourism meeting in January,
Or withdraw your motion.
or withdraw your motion.
And then if Brian and Paul are here, we're just gonna carry over to next month. We'll never get to where we gotta be.
Paul,
He's a Northern Zone.
I'd rather get started now.
Exactly.
Why table it? Not have a voice.
No, I'm not.
Well, there's not 4 votes, we'll table it till next month and I'll make sure Brian's here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I should have brought it up. I've been losing motion left and right lately. I can let somebody else do it.
Motion on the floor to motion and process, and have the introductory of local law in December.
So that goes right to the board in December.
This could be
No,
introduced.
it's an introduction and it's in a public hearing. That's
Right.
all it is in December.
It's getting to the point to be able to have further dialogue.
You can set the public hearing for February, December if you want to. I'm okay with that.
That's another wrinkle.
Sure. That way, the January meeting of this, we can discuss it. How's that? I would suggest we set the public hearing for February.
I'm not ready to move to Warren County.
I'm still back on my other platform that if it's not on the agenda, we shouldn't be
Well, Jay
going.
doesn't vote for it, that anyway, because we only have 3 votes.
It's not on the agenda.
There's another.
I mean, there might have been 10 more people in this room if they knew it was gonna be on the agenda.
That's why I'm saying we talked about it at the next.
Right, I'm with you on that. Withdraw your motion and talk about it at the next meeting, put it on the agenda. You got plenty of time. It's in December, our January meeting.
We're gonna set the public hearing for February, so at the January meeting of this committee, we can discuss it.
Go ahead.
Then you
Melissa.
tell what you want.
Supervisor Shaw mentioned bringing, I think it's you, mentioned bringing in Snowmobile Club, or at least the president
Dave
of.
Bergen,
And do you want me to reach out to him and see if he's available to come in for the January committee meeting to discuss it further
I'd like-
before you go
yeah.
forward?
He could convince me it's the right thing.
If we introduce the local law in December and we have it on the agenda to.
set the public hearing for February.
Right, and we have them come in January, we still got plenty of time to discuss it. Right,
Call the question.
But you're
All right, go.
taking action without being on the agenda, which we all boo-hooed not too long
We do that
ago.
all the time.
right. In committee, I mean, it's different,
That's the other.
right, it's different for,
Specific.
You gotta call the
It's
question.
different for, depending on what you're.
We do it all the time.
You gotta call the question.
all right, call the question, those all in favor, signify, any further dialogue? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No,
Okay.
but I probably support it when I can.
We're gonna have plenty of dialogue to.
I'll take the flyer and actually write a law. Next time you want to talk about it.
Okay. Any other business come before the Ag Planning and Tourism Committee? All right, that being said, we are adjourned for the rest of the year.
That's the.
I spoke to him this morning.